Thank you. So, as expected, we're behind schedule, but there might be time for a question or two before we have our break. So, if anybody would like to ask anything, either Sami or Daniel on the subject, you're welcome. There's a question.
Hello.
Is it for Daniel or for Sami?
For Daniel, in this case, yeah. I was just wondering, how was your experience, your personal experience, because you're from Jaffa, no? Yeah.
Personal experience about what?
About how did you feel in Jaffa as a young boy, as a young Jewish boy, and about.
I think there's something interesting about growing up a Jew in Jaffa, which is perhaps why I became an anthropologist, because it is the opposite experience of what Jews feel elsewhere, right? Jews in general in Israel feel part of the landlords, the majority. But in Jaffa, Jews are, at least in my time, were in certain neighborhoods in a position of minority. So for example, I went to the French school, and in the French school at one point I was the only Jew in my class. Most of the kids were Arabs, right? And I think this is a very healthy experience for Jews in Israel, because you can understand what the other is feeling. But it is also a very exceptional feeling, because most Jews end up in Jewish schools and in Jewish neighborhoods, and only few of them. But it's something that exists. When you live in a mixed city, you lose this sense of ownership. I think it happens for both sides in different degrees. Palestinians are having a chronic sense of losing, of lacking ownership, but as opposed to villages, for example, or as opposed to Nazareth or other cities, no one really has a sense of complete hegemony over the city, right? If you bring like residents from the city, they will all complain that they don't have full control of their space. And this is what I think is quite interesting about mixed cities, not just in Israel and Palestine, all over the world, that there is a common sense of lack of control. And I think this is from the sociological perspective. From the political perspective, the idea is to turn this into a form of pluralism, to turn this sense of the lack of hegemony to making virtue out of reality, to turn this sense of being a stranger in your own house or in your own city into an advantage, into a form of multiculturalism.
Another one?
Just a minor thing to the second speaker. You showed a picture with a graffiti with a Jewish Star of David with a swastika in it, and it looks just like an incredible contradiction.
Yeah.
And how do you explain that?
I'm not sure. I must say I'm asking all the time, also because I hope someone would know. But the only case I know of this combination is something in Kiryat Arba, in the Jewish settlement in Hebron. So this combination is not really clear, and this is I think why the censor, the second author, decided to delete it, because it was such a contradiction.
And just one more thing. You spoke about new settlers coming from the West Bank now,
Yes.
settling in Jaffa.
Yeah.
Are they taking up the old houses or building new ones like they do in
Yes.
the West Bank?
I mean, the question is, what is old and new in Jaffa is complicated, because even if it's a new house, it is on Palestinian land or on previous houses that were destroyed. So what is new, what is not new? I mean, Jews often use this excuse as a form of legitimacy, but I don't live in Palestinian land, or I don't live in an Arab land, or in a stolen land house. But the fact is, was there something before? And even if there was nothing there before, who owned the land before, right? So it's a very tricky distinction. Specifically, we're talking about a group of settlers, usually middle class, The rabbi of Bet El, which is a famous settlement, became at one point the rabbi of the Jaffa settlement. They have a yeshiva, like a congregation, and they are split in different places, usually in projects. Look, usually in apartment houses, not Arab houses. But as I said, it doesn't really matter. The fact is that their political presence, and there is this project that they built, the Emunah, this association. So the fact that they are using Jaffa and other cities, it's not just Jaffa, as a space for expansion is what really troubles me, and I think should trouble everyone.
I'm not sure if this is going to come out in a form of a question. I'm just going to, bear with me, I'm just going to say what I was thinking while I was watching the slides about how Arabic communities are kind of popping out in the middle of the Israeli state, which is great, I think, and also that the community is getting stronger in some ways, as you were explaining with the slides. And also yesterday at dinner, Asami was explaining a little bit how they are doing some great work with the children in schools in Jaffa. And I think it's all great, but when it comes to seeing the world, for me, I see the world through these relations of power. So people are in power, and there are some people who don't have power, and I'm certainly a person in power because I'm white, I'm living in European Union and all that, and I'm aware of my privileges. But here it's like the Israelis, the Jewish people, and the Palestinians, and it's obvious that the Jewish people have all the power, the social power, the economic power, the military power, the political power. And I'm just wondering, because also the state of Israel has this strong campaign about showing it as a state that respects human rights, especially when it comes to LGBT people, women's rights, etc., etc. I'm just wondering if maybe also they could use that some of the Arabic communities are being stronger as opposed to 1948, sorry. That they're using this as a token. Okay, look, we are, giving them the space to grow, to develop their culture. We are actually a good state, and they are still attacking us. In a way, being a token Arab in the middle of. Do you see that also happening, or I'm just being paranoid a little bit? Both of you are.
The fact that you are, as Budian said, the fact that you are paranoid doesn't mean that no one is chasing you. So you are paranoid, but you are right to be paranoid. And Sami can talk about it because he was involved in it personally, but for example, the bilingual schools now, there is a bilingual school now in Jaffa in operation and kind of growing. And this is definitely, I think, an example that the municipality is trying to co-opt, is trying to appropriate. So on the one hand, it's a victory for the progressive kind of front for parents of Palestinian and Jewish parents who want their kids to learn both Arabic and Hebrew together. On the other, and this is a very radical experiment in many ways in this context, on the other hand, it is appropriated by the municipalities, as you said, as a form of not pink washing, but Arab washing, perhaps. So.
I like to say two things here. Usually when we talk about Jaffa, when we talk about the Nakba, when we talk about Palestine, the main feeling is that people had enough and that this conflict should end, and as fast as possible. Come on guys, okay, you fought enough, you did us too much trouble, now we expect you in the next 2 years to end the conflict. Now, I think that, one of the biggest mistakes of the Palestinian leadership, at least the PLO, is that they built this illusion. Since the Oslo agreement or disagreement, people are having this hope that there is something discreetly or secretly happening, and probably Arafat and now Abu Mazen are going to tell us that we got to something and there is a solution. People who are activists should know that in the near future there is no solution. And that both sides are very far from the minimum that each other wants. And we should be aware of this. and the Israelis don't have a good reason why to share the cake. They are enjoying all of the cake, and there is no pressure on them, not any kind of it. The occupation is a great machine of making money. They have 5 million clients in the West Bank and Gaza that have to buy everything and do everything through Israel. So they are not paying anything. The Palestinians can't hurt them violently. There's a huge gap in the power relations. So violently, Palestinians cannot do anything. The Arab world surely is not promising anything serious in the next decade. Okay? So the only thing is to put international pressure in order to lead to somewhere, in order to get to somewhere. There should be some international pressure. This is why I think that the BDS is a great work. By the way, I think very positive on this. I think this is the only peaceful tool to get to a just solution. And the Israelis should be very thankful, by the way, for the BDS activists, because the other option is violence. The injustice in Palestine cannot continue. With the Palestinians, we will never accept our inferiority in our homeland. Okay, we fight at least for peace and justice. And we see this as a historical compromise. Okay? So, a BDS campaign is the only non-violent solution. But this is going to take a lot of time. To convince the Israelis that it is their interest to share the cake will take a lot of time. We are in a situation that till today, the Israelis do not believe that there is another side. They don't see the Palestinians as a nation and that this group has national rights on Palestine. They don't think this way. So it's going to take some time. So this is one thing. The other thing, I totally agree with Daniel, my friend, that there is a hope for a solution. And I think that when we talk about solution, that multiculturalism is a solution. And not just because it's a historical compromise, not just because some people are talking that, okay, we don't have any other choices, and the others are here, and we have to bear them in the future. Not because of disincentives. I think that multiculturalism is very positive for building a more human, enlightened communities all over, not just in Palestine. The fact that people have different cultures, different colors, different languages, different traditions, enriches every human society. So this is something good that we have in Jaffa. And this is why when we thought about a solution of how do we want to imagine the future of this city, okay, considering its present and its past, of course, we were thinking that we would like to develop Jaffa as a multicultural, equal city. Okay? But this is a very long-term project, and we need a lot of patience. There is ways to think about a solution, but this should be known that it's going to take a lot of time. Like the IRA were saying, while little bit before signing the agreement with the British, that they have still 40 years to get to somewhere. Okay? We, because of the Oslo agreement, built this illusion that peace is just on the way. I'm sorry, but it's not on the way, not in the near future.
Okay. There's a very short coffee break, so please 10 minutes, no more, and then we'll have the second part, which will also be shorter than this one because it's only me speaking. Okay. Okay, so this second part is about the business relationship between the family of Abdul Rahim and Slovenia. Now, first of all, I have to say that I'm not an academic, okay? So this is why you had the coffee break, so you can forget about the academics before it. And now it's my turn. And the way I did it is really from a perspective of a personal journey into a story which I didn't know about until 2 or 3 years ago, and which somehow also involved my family. And so the way we're going to do it is, first of all, Dima Abdul Rahim, the daughter of Ahmad Abdul Rahim, who cannot be with us today, Dima, because she's busy on another conference, but she did send us a video in which she will speak about the Slovene relationship between Slovenia and her family. It's a very short video, 11 minutes, not very long, but it gives you a whole idea of the situation. After that, I will pick on some aspects of what she says and expand on them and end up with my own personal comments. And so I think we should be ready for lunch on time.
Dear friends, first of all, let me apologize for not being able to be with you today for circumstances beyond my control. My name is Dima Abdul Rahim. I'm the daughter of Ahmed and the granddaughter of Muhammad Abdul Rahim, a man from Jaffa who started a relationship with Slovenia in the 1930s, almost 90 years ago. This relationship, which lasted very many decades, was initially born out of a political decision as well as a commercial decision. Muhammad Abdul Rahim had been in the 1930s the owner of orange groves in Jaffa, his biyarat of Ras Al Ain and Jabaliyah. He exported oranges to a number of Middle Eastern and European countries, and he needed wooden boxes to store the oranges. He initially bought oranges in Palestine. However, at the time, the import and sale of food was almost exclusively Jewish-owned. Muhammad Abdul Rahim wanted to break this monopoly and increase direct Arab involvement and investment by sourcing the wood directly. His journey took him to Slovenia. Muhammad Abdul Rahim started importing pine wood for orange boxes in Jaffa from the sawmills in northwestern Slovenia in the 1930s. In 1933, he also purchased a piece of land with forest and 2 factories in the area of Soteska. He also imported machinery to process the wood which was cut in the forest into slabs. The sawmill was run in partnership with men from the area, including Mr. Tulish Tolka. Nada Pretner, who's with you today, found interesting documents from the time referring to the shipment of pine wood from Slovenia for boards for orange boxes in Jaffa. For example, between August and November 1937, 12 shipments were sent from the Soteska sawmill to Jaffa. Nada also kindly translated a document which was published in 2005, where the author interviewed some of the old workers who remembered my family. Some still remembered how my father and grandfather would visit the sawmill, the wood mill every year, and how they sent a carriage full of oranges. For many workers, this was the first encounter with an orange. My father would often talk about the sawmills and people of Slovenia very fondly. He would tell us, for example, stories of the cable cars from the sawmill which transported wood from the sawmill to be shipped to Jaffa. In the 1930s, this must have been the height of technology. My father spent considerable time in Slovenia and came to love the country and its people. The involvement of my family in the forest and sawmills of northwest Slovenia started with the Second World War and following Tito's process of nationalization. The property and lands that Muhammad Abdul Rahim had bought in the 1930s were lost. There was also the other matter of the loss of Palestine in 1948. I shall not go into the devastating impact the Nakba had on my family, as it had on all people of Jaffa and Palestine, including those who were better off. I'm sure that others at this conference will cover this much more articulately. I just wanted to say that the Abdul Rahim found themselves in exile in Lebanon, as had hundreds of thousands of other Palestinians, and it is in Beirut in the 1950s where their Abdul Rahim-Slovenia relationship continued. In the 1950s, my grandfather founded a company in Beirut called Abdurrahim and Son. And the company soon established relations with the Sloveniani, which was the Yugoslav timber export company. Abdurrahim and Son also became the regional representative of Sloveniani. My family imported wood and plywood from Yugoslavia at the time. They also imported furniture from factories near the border with Croatia. And the work continued throughout the 1950s and 1960s, where my father and Uncle Akram would visit the country regularly. But the 1970s relationship between Abdurrahims and Slovenia fizzled out a little bit as a result of a number of factors, including that by that time Abdurrahim and Sons had built a factory, a furniture factory in Lebanon, and produced furniture locally. They continued for a while to import wood from Slovenia. Now, the history of my family is a good metaphor of the history of the Palestinians and of the Middle East in general. In 1975, the Abdurrahim and Sons factory was burnt down to the ground. It was Palestinian-owned and located on the wrong side of the Lebanese civil war. Interestingly, one of the last projects of the factory was to build the furniture for the offices of the Narodni Bank in Beirut. Now, in order to earn his living after the destruction of his factory, my father moved to Kuwait, where he continued to work in the furniture business. Although he produced much of it locally, he also went back to Ljubljana in the 1980s and started once again importing furniture from there. The Abdurrahim Slovenia relationship resumed once again, albeit at a lesser level. Now, this is the Middle East. Nothing lasts for very long. The Saddam invasion of Kuwait in 1990 put an end of the work of my father in Kuwait. By then, he was quite old. He went back to Beirut and retired. And that was the end of the business relationship between the Abdurrahims and Slovenia. Now, I say business relationship because this was by no means the only relationship that Abdurrahim had with Slovenia. My family had great attachment to this country, and they had relationships of friendship and relationships of history, which continue to this day. There were friendships that lasted for many decades. This includes between that of my father and Uncle Akram, with the father of Nada Pretner and the rest of her family. I have with me at home here a beautiful enamel bowl, which was Nada's wedding present for my parents many, many years ago. Today, the relationship continues across the generations of the two families and to include Nada's sons and mine. I also want to mention Jose Novak, a very dear friend of the family and very much part of our history, at least our history in the last 60 years or 70 years. Indeed, Slovenia is part of my family history. As a child, I grew up listening to my father's stories of the forests and sawmills in Slovenia. My father's stories of Slovenia were often intermingled with his story of the Jaffa orange, his stories of his orange groves of Ras Al Ain and Abbasiyya, his beloved orange grove and his beloved Jaffa. Ljubljana also figures very much in my own personal history. My mother and father spent their honeymoon in the city and continued to visit it regularly. As a child, Yugoslavia, as we knew it then, meant that my father was going away for work, but coming back with delicious salami and beautiful presents. While growing up, I was surrounded by things that came from Slovenia. In my parents' house, the furniture in the dining room came from the city. The ceiling lamp, the painting by Goryub, the hand-painted beehive panels, all came from Ljubljana. Now, Yugoslavia in the 1960s and 1970s may have been seen by most of the world as being in the grip of grey communism. For me, it was where beautiful things came from. I visited Ljubljana last year for the first time. As I looked out of the window as we were landing at the airport when I arrived, I saw a beautiful city surrounded by spectacular snow-capped mountains. I thought of my grandfather. What would a man who was born in Manchia in Jaffa at the end of the 19th century felt when he visited the city? How different it would have been from the Jaffa that he knew. How out of his comfort he must have been, especially as he spoke no foreign languages. But the decision of Muhammad Abdul Rahim to come in Slovenia in the 1930s must have been a big leap in the dark for him. A leap in the dark taken by a remarkable man. Of course, there would have been commercial interest in his decision to come to the sawmills of Slovenia, but it was foremost a political decision about the fate of the Arab-Palestinian Jaffa orange and the wooden box in which it can be stored. We all know that the story had a sad ending. Muhammad Abdul Rahim lost his oranges and his beloved Jaffa. For us today, his grandchildren, Palestinian Arab Jaffa oranges, oranges from Ras Al Ain and Jabaliya groves, exist only in our collective memory, as well as in our identity as refugees from Jaffa. For us, the grandchildren of Muhammad Abdul Rahim, there's a little bit of Slovenia in the Palestinian Jaffa orange. We thank you for that. Once again, please accept my apologies for not being with you in person. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my family history with you. I know that my late father Ahmed would have been very pleased and very proud, as Slovenia meant a great deal to him. I know that a little part of his soul and his spirit resides somewhere in Ljubljana. Thank you.
Quite an emotional video, I think, for many of us. By the way, this is just brackets. The mother of Dima just happened to have an exhibition at Tate Modern, which was opened not less than a week ago. It's an exhibition which uses the embroidery, the panels of embroidery from the NGO of which she is a founder. So she is much alive and active still. This is the mother of Dima. So going back to this story of the Slovene business relationship between Abdul Rahim family and Slovenia as such, I just wanted to point on two things that Dima mentions. She says that her father, or her grandfather rather, started for political reasons because he wanted to break the monopoly that the Jewish citrus exporters had on the price of wood. And from what I found, the reason being behind this really was that during the Mandate period, we're talking during the Mandate period, there was quite an influx of immigration, of Jewish immigration from the Eastern European countries, which means that they brought with them a certain tradition. And in this case specifically, it was the tradition of cooperatives, something that was not traditional for the Palestinian businessmen in general and orange growers, sorry. Because the Palestinian system was more a family-based system. In other words, the business was passed from generation to generation, from father to son, and they were in some way self-contained as well. While the mindset and the mentality of the new Jewish immigrants, they brought with them the idea of being organized in cooperatives, and mind you, they had just arrived, which means they had no background and history on which to build. And therefore they did organize in cooperatives, and again, the British in a way helped this, because it was the British in the early 20s that passed a legislation which somehow regulated the cooperative, so giving it a legal framework as well. And so this allowed the Jewish community of citrus growers to get better organized and to organize all the various branches, including the importation of wood. So what quite commendably Mohammed Abdul Rahim wanted to do was to break this this monopoly. Now, the next question could be quite logically, why Slovenia? I mean, Slovenia is not the only country with wood. There is, at the time, there was already importation from Romania, for example, was one of the countries. There was a reason in the case of the Abdul Rahims, and I'm lucky enough to be able to quote Ahmad Abdul Rahim, in which he explains why his father decided to start his business in Slovenia. And this is, again, a part of a book which has not been translated into English. It's Jaffa Iter Medina, but we are lucky enough to have a bit translated into English, so I can, if you don't mind, I will read it to you. It's a very short bit, but I prefer Ahmad to say why they went to Slovenia. So he says, he starts off like this, and he says, "We had an Italian chap who died lonely. He came from a town called Bari, so in the south of Italy. My father took very good care of him and gave him 2 or 3 rooms free of charge so that he might work as a commission dealer, bringing plant and industrial oils for the soap factories in Jaffa. There were many soap factories in Jaffa. One belonged to the Damiani family and another to the Dabas family. Most of those working in the soap manufacturing business were Christians. It was different from the soap made in Naples, where only olive oil was used. The Italian fellow was very active. During the First World War, he was taken prisoner in Yugoslavia, together with other soldiers. There he learned the Yugoslavian language. Jews at the time in Palestine were small in number. They imported wood until they controlled its prices. Some people of Abd al-Nur family imported wooden cases from Romania for the oranges, but it was not sufficient. Palestine used to export 18 million cases of oranges in one season. More than 9 million were produced by the Arabs. The Italian young man advised my father to import wood to break the Jewish monopoly, and my father agreed to import wood from Yugoslavia. The Italian fellow went with my father to Yugoslavia, where my father purchased a piece of land of 12 dunams with a small factory, which is a sawmill really, and then another small factory adjacent to the place. And then my father imported the machines from Germany for the wood to be cut from the forest and made into slabs to be cut in the factory. In 1933, I was a student at the American University of Beirut, and in 1934, the 2 factories exported 180,000 boxes. The next year, 350,000 boxes, and the third year, 800,000 boxes. The second factory was just improved when World War II broke out and Germany attacked Yugoslavia. Yugoslavia was a royal country at the time and then became communist under Tito. All properties were nationalized, including my father's. Therefore, we lost all our property in Yugoslavia. So this is how the family came to Bohinska Bistrica, to be more exact. Thank you to an Italian person who happened to become a POW in what was to become Yugoslavia, and somehow popped up again in Jaffa and was employed by the Abdul Rahims, and then they came back again, so it's like a whole circle. So this is how this happened. And at this point, a few more words about the sawmill that Dima mentions here. And she mentions that some workers still remembered how the Abdul Rahim would come there every year. Now, all this was taken from a document, a small research published by a gentleman from Jesenice whose name is Isidor Troyer. And he made a very, very tough research on specifically only on the sawmill. And in 2005, he was lucky enough to be able to interview most of the workers who at the time of the Abdul Rahims had still worked at the sawmill. And apparently they also told him that there were about 60 workers. They had 12-hour shifts. So the sawmill worked 24 hours a day, 24/7 I assume, but the working conditions they specified were very good because they worked 12-hour shifts, but any hour in excess of the regular 8 hours was paid double. Okay? Also, they remember how Mohammed and then Ahmed would come once a year to settle all the accounts, and how twice they sent them carriages full of oranges for the workers specifically as a thank you for their work. So you can see, this made me think this morning when I was preparing, cooperatives versus family-owned things. You see this emotional and humane element in it, okay? So you can imagine somebody who was in Jaffa thinking of his workers in Bohinska Bistrica and sending them oranges to thank them for their work, which is probably a completely different mindset from a cooperative type of approach to work. So they were able to bring it over even to us in Slovenia. In any case, the sawmill was owned in, he had a partner here in Slovenia, which Dima mentions, Torkar. And he was a man, there's also a picture of him at the exhibition, who was also a character. He was not from the area. He was from Podbrdo, which is towards the Italian side. And in the 20s, he escaped to Bohinska Bistrica area because he was chased by the Italian fascist government. Okay? And why? Because he was a member of the Tigr organization, so a nationalist Slovene organization. And we don't know whether the Abdul Rahims knew it or not, but he used the sawmill to hide all the propaganda material of Tigr inside the sawmill. But on the other hand, he was also quite a well-off person, and apparently he was the first one to own I don't know if you know this brand of cars, DKW. Okay, he was the first in the area, and with that car he would come every day to work at the sawmill. So he was quite an interesting person. The Abdul Rahims, obviously, when they came from Jaffa, they had quite a trip, as Dima mentions. So most likely they traveled with ships at the time owned by Lloyd Triestino to Trieste, and these ships had the right names. They were called Galilea, Jerusalem, because they went down to the Middle East, specifically from Beirut, and Palestine was the area. And from there he would probably take a train from Trieste to Lisse, where I presume Torkar was waiting for them with his DKW car to take them to the sawmill, most likely, I assume. So these were just a few things that I wanted to add to what Dima said. Then there's this last bit, which is the relationship with my family, which she mentions. Now, the Abdul Rahims were actually present here in Slovenia one way or the other for 50 years, which is quite, half a century, if you think, well, 2 generations. My family comes in only for a small bit of this part, and it's at the beginning of the 50s, when the Abdul Rahims have been expelled from Jaffa, so it's after the orange export period, when they are in Beirut and they decide to resume their business of importing wood from Slovenia. So what happened is that they wrote a letter to Slovenia List, the Abdul Rahims wrote a letter to Slovenia List saying that before 1948 they had received a shipment of wood which they had never settled the payment of. So they wrote again to Slovenia List to say that now is the time to settle for the payment. And the letter landed on my father's desk because he happened to be the manager, the director of Slovenia Les at the time, in the beginning of the 50s. So my father was impressed, obviously, so the story goes this way. But obviously he replied, and the business relationship resumed through Slovenia Les, and automatically through my father, for the simple reason that he happened to be there, but it developed into a friendship. This is the whole point. So they used to come to Ljubljana, always staying at Hotel Slon for maybe a month or 2 months. And there were two brothers, Ahmed, Dima's father, and Akram, the younger one. So apparently Ahmed was very busy working, and Akram was more busy taking pictures, apparently. And this is why you can see some snapshots of me at age 3 playing, because it was Akram who obviously, you know, had more time to spare. So that was one way of doing it. Now, I have obviously no memory of this, because I was definitely too small to remember this. But the whole thing came into light because a couple of years ago, it was my mother who, knowing that I'm active for the Palestinian cause, decided that, you know, she's elderly obviously, but said, you know, you keep going to Palestine and you'd never come back with news from the Abdul Rahim, so why don't you, you know, do your job properly as well? And try to find out where they are. Because she had this memory, it's incredible. Maybe because we're elderly, it's the long-term memories which come back more vividly. But at a certain point, she said, I have to know where they are. So I started trying to find, you know, some track of them. And for a year, I was completely unsuccessful. In the meantime, we started the research for the exhibition. And so, through Facebook is important, through Facebook post, but of Ilan Pape, the historian, I saw the cover book of Jaffa Forever, which is obviously connected with Mr. Derhali, and he kindly sent me the book. Then, so this is how we started our correspondence, and then out of desperation I wrote to him if maybe he knows the Abdul Rahims. And there was silence for 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, so I said probably this is another dead end. And then I received an email with everything. The names, the emails, the phone numbers, everything of the family, and which I obviously contacted. And this is how I got in touch with Dima, whom I met in London. She lives in London. And this is how, as she quite correctly mentions, the relationship somehow continues also 3 generations later, yes. So she also mentions her memories of her father coming back from Ljubljana with salami and ham. And she once told me that usually she had this habit in the morning when everybody was still sleeping of running down into the kitchen and slicing the ham without people noticing it. And I have a reverse memory because my father used to travel a lot to Beirut and to meet the family, I mean. And he would come back. Now remember, this is Yugoslavia in 1953. You know, you might remember or have heard what it was like. And my father would come back with boxes of satin boxes, you know, beautiful fabric, and he would open it, and there would be layers and layers and layers of candied fruit from Beirut, you know, whole pears, whole walnuts, and this for us was, you can imagine, like a treasure trove. So I had the memory of that, and also, as she mentions, the furniture, you know, she says, our house was more Slovenian than Palestinian because of the furniture. In our case, it was the reverse. So we have things from the Middle East, especially carpets, which are still in our house today, that Ahmed used to bring to my mother as a present when he came from Beirut. So this is the end, and if not the end, the beginning, let's say, somehow, because thank you to Mr. Derhali again, I'm sorry, but it's your responsibility. We were able to get in touch again. We are more or less the same age, and our sons are almost the same age. One of my sons lives in London, like so does Dima. And so this, in fact, he did the video. So this kind of friendship is continuing. And in fact, next week I'm going to London also to see the exhibition of Dima's mother. So that's it. I think we can finish here.
Questions?
Questions?
Oh yeah, you want questions?
Yes. Where was the wood for the cases imported before? By the you said you spoke about, and Dima spoke about the Jewish monopoly on them. Where did they import it from?
Well, one place was Romania, in fact. Do you know about that, Daniel, that they imported wood from Romania? Sweden was another place. They used to Finland as well. I found Sweden and Romania. You remember Finland as well was one of the places.
One more question. It really struck me why 12-hour shifts if you have to work 24 hours a day?
Well, there were two groups of people.
Yes, why not 3? I'm not a trade union representative, but I think they should have been.
I wondered this. I can't give you an answer, but I don't know whether they did not have enough workforce, which seems strange.
I think working 12 hours in the sawmill must have been terrible.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And then one more question and I'm through with it. You said they took salami and ham, but were they Muslim or but they were Muslim who ate pork meat?
Yes, but not all Muslims don't eat.
Okay, silly question, but it is usually supposed that they
I just want to mention that, I mean, you mentioned that the industry, the orange industry, was more or less equally divided at the time in the 40s.
When I was reading,
yes.
Yeah, he mentioned that.
And this is an interesting story to tell because during the turmoil, during the fighting, there was an attempt by both Jewish and Palestinian orange growers to stop the fighting for harvest. So yeah, there were attempts. I mean, we have two forces here. We have the nationalist forces of territorial expansion, and we have on the other hand the capitalist actors and of commerce and which actually did want to maintain certain form of competition, but also collaboration and some form of joint interest. And of course, they failed, they didn't succeed, and fighting went on.
This was in 47 or when?
Yes.
Thank you, that's interesting. Because apparently from what I read, there wasn't such a great collaboration between the various orange growers.
But there were some collective
There was
interests.
some, yes.
They had to conform to certain standards. There was the citrus board.
Yes.
So
But this, yeah.
they had, they couldn't, I mean, to export oranges, you have to meet certain standards.
Yes.
And this they were laid by the citrus board.
Yes, but the fact that why didn't they join the Jewish orange growers cooperate together with the Arabs or the Palestinians actually? I was just saying that there wasn't much of this. There were some few examples, but not many, right?
I mean, there were a few examples. There was, for example, in 46, there was a strike of civil servants started by David De Vries. So there were examples of kind of joint interest, and I think the orange groves, they were partly national interests, partly competitive, and partly joint.
Who are mostly owners now? What is the situation with the orange growers?
In the sense that the industry died after 1948 due to the Israeli policies. They did, in the 70s, it basically ground to a full stop. Because I found some pictures from Ashdod, they would be exporting Jaffa oranges. But then the whole thing really stopped. It was
Those
no
that are
longer.
labeled Jaffa now come actually.
No.
Well, the Jaffa brand is now being outsourced, so to speak, as a franchise to South African companies. Yeah, if you go to Mercator, you will find Jaffa,
Yes.
and then look at the place of origin, and it's South Africa.
No, I saw
Not
that.
always, yeah.
But it has nothing to do with Jaffa. Due to urbanization, basically all orange
There are
groves
not very many, I
disappeared.
saw that, but there
You
are-
have a few in the occupied territories, you have a few in the Sharon and the Galilee, and that's it.
There are still some. In fact, there are some pictures on the video. but-
It's a subtle topic to one.
Yes, that's what I said. There is, but outside Jaffa, let's say about half an hour, 20 minutes outside Jaffa, there are still, and they are owned by Israelis, but actually worked and operated by Palestinian family. This is the one I visited.
Beersheba.
It was in
So we
Beersheba.
should not be in Jaffa.
He took you the one near Sheba.
Not in Beersheba.
Beersheba is too hot.
The guy who runs that.
Ah, okay. Sandy, you want to
I just wanted to tell the audience about the movie of Sivan, which is
Ah, okay.
a very good source.
Yes, tell them.
There's a very good movie done by Professor Eyal Sivan that tries to tell the history of Jaffa, the city, through the history of the orange tree and the orange industry. It's called Clockwork Orange. So anyone who is also interested in knowing more, it's a very nice movie. And Professor Sivan there is doing a lot of interviews with different intellectuals, Palestinians and Israelis, and tries to tell the story through the story of the orange tree, and then they also talk about the history of it and what is the current situation.
And you can find it on Amazon. Yeah. Okay, so we can go.